They told us it was a story of compassion, a noble invention to save the fragile and the premature. This is the cover story, the cognitive dissonance sold to us as history. But if these machines were a medical revolution, why were they relegated to the status of a sideshow attraction for 40 years? Why was the price of a human life a ticket to a fair? You've always felt it, haven't you? That low hum of a lie, a deep resonance telling you the narrative is fractured. If you feel this rupture in the timeline, leave your signal. From where and what time are you watching? Let us now move from the realm of the hypothetical to the hard, cold surface of the evidence. For any investigation, the first step is to secure the crime scene. And our crime scene is frozen in time, preserved in silver nitrate and sepia tone. The photographs of the era are not mere illustrations, they are forensic documents. They are the silent witnesses we must now cross-examine. We are presented with a profound visual paradox, a dissonance so jarring it should have stopped history in its tracks. On one side of the frame, we see the technology itself, the incubators. Look at them, gleaming modules of polished steel and flawless glass, engineered with a precision that feels alien to the age. The forum for your theory is open. We are waiting. The logistical paradox of the incubator exhibits deepens, and it liquefies borders. To believe the official narrative is to accept that this anomaly, this strange fusion of high technology and carnival sideshow, was a uniquely American phenomenon, born from the eccentric genius of one man. But the evidence, when we dare to look, reveals a chillingly different pattern. The lie is not local, it is global. The operation was not an invention, it was a protocol. Let the vertigo begin. Berlin, 1896, the Great Industrial Exposition. There they are. Rows of identical glass and steel modules, housing infants, presented to a paying public under the direction of a local physician. A mirror image of the Coney Island spectacle. Now jump. Paris, 1900. The Exposition Universelle. Again, the same scene. A pavilion of couveaux d'enfants, a celebrated humanitarian marvel, drawing crowds in praise. London, 1897. The Victorian-era exhibition. The pattern repeats with haunting precision. Brussels, St. Petersburg. Across the capitals of a world supposedly defined by fierce national rivalries and slow sea-based communication, the exact same technological and social solution erupts simultaneously. We are asked to believe this was mere inspiration, a good idea spreading organically. But this was the age of steamships and telegrams, not the internet. Their lines are clean, their design is ruthlessly functional. They are artifacts of a future we were told was yet to come, sitting there in the past. This is level 5 technology. Now, pull back. Look at the other side of the frame. The environment, the context. These life support systems of unparalleled sophistication are not in sterilized, hermetically sealed laboratories. They are housed in what can only be described as wooden shacks, temporary pavilions erected on the muddy grounds of World's Fairs and the sawdust floors of Coney Island amusement parks. Look at the operators. The nurses, draped in heavy, cumbersome Victorian wool, their faces betraying a mixture of duty and bewilderment. They move within this scene of advanced biotechnology, with the clumsy grace of a blacksmith attempting to repair a clock. This is a level 1 environment. Look closely at this image. Do you see it? The jarring disconnect. The cognitive dissonance of a sterile, life-sustaining machine, surrounded by the dust, the crowds, and the primitive infrastructure of the 19th century. If this visual contradiction resonates with you, if you can feel the impossibility of this scene, acknowledge it. Let your like on this document serve as a witness marker, so that others may be guided to this evidence. The sheer logistical absurdity screams at us from across the century. The replication is too perfect, too swift. It's the signature of a franchise model, a pre-packaged system being deployed by different local managers, the same glass boxes, the same vulnerable infants, the same comforting narrative sold for a handful of coins. This is not cultural exchange. It is the echo of a unified control matrix, the ghost of a single, global civilization whose standard operating procedures were being selectively reactivated. The controllers of the new timeline were not inventing solutions. They were reading from a recovered instruction manual. This global synchronicity is the key. It forces us to zoom out, to see the incubator not as an isolated curiosity, but is a single vital component in a much larger machine, a planetary-scale pipeline for repopulation. And once you see the pipeline, you can never unsee it. The incubator is the linchpin, the missing link that connects two other great unsettling mysteries of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the World's Fairs and the orphan trains. Consider the first stage of the pipeline, the World's Fairs. We are told these were temporary festivals celebrating industrial progress. But look at them. Colossal, magnificent structures of stone and steel, built with a grandeur and precision that our own modern age struggles to replicate. How do you maintain a sterile environment for the most vulnerable of human lives in a temporary fairground booth, next to the hot dog stand and the freak show? The official narrative provides no answer. It doesn't even acknowledge the question. But the crime scene is not just the context, it is the object itself. We must zoom in. The technology has been altered, downgraded. Look at the close-up photographs. See the panels, with strange, filled-in holes, the access ports that lead to nothing and serve no declared medical function. Notice the surfaces, sometimes covered in a thick, new layer of paint, as if to conceal something beneath. In some rare, unretouched images, you can see the faint ghosts of indecipherable glyphs or symbols, a language not of this paradigm, hastily covered over. We are looking at heretical modifications. And then there is the most damning piece of physical evidence, the power source. Where are the massive electrical generators? The complex wiring? The infrastructure required to power dozens of these precision climate-controlled units, 24 hours a day? It is not there. Instead, we see a crude adaptation. We see a single, primitive hot water boiler, often tucked away in a corner, with a clumsy tangle of pipes and rubber hoses running to the modules. We are shown photographs of men in bowler hats with horse-drawn carts standing before these cyclopean palaces, and are told they built them in a matter of months, only to tear them down when the fair was over. This is a narrative designed to insult our intelligence. The fairs were not built for the new, primitive inheritors. The fairs were held in inherited, monumental ruins of the old world. They were showrooms. They were massive stages for a psychological operation, designed to introduce the survivors, the amnesiacs, to their new history and their newly invented technology. It was here, in these grand halls, that the public was acclimated to the strange sight of life being sustained behind glass. It was the normalization of the artificial. Now consider the final stage of the pipeline, the orphan asylums and the orphan trains, a flood of parentless children, appearing as if from nowhere, filling vast, newly built orphanages. Children with no history, no lineage, no memory of a world before. They were then loaded onto trains and shipped out by the hundreds of thousands to repopulate the strangely empty towns and farmlands of America and beyond. The official story blames wars, poverty, and disease, plausible deniability. But the scale is industrial. The logistics are military. It is not a rescue mission. They took a piece of inherited advanced technology and jury-rigged it to run on steam, the most basic power of their era. It is the equivalent of finding a quantum computer and using it to warm a pot of tea. This is the central crime revealed by the visual evidence. We are not looking at an invention. We are looking at an act of technological desecration. A cargo cult. The operators of this post-reset world found these functioning, abandoned human generation nodules, likely still sitting within the grand, inherited Tartarian structures they called World's Fair Palaces. They could not comprehend the original power source, perhaps atmospheric, perhaps etheric, so they did the only thing they could. They broke them open, ripped out the sophisticated internals, and hooked them up to a simple boiler. They transformed a self-contained creation matrix into a simple warm box. The photographs do not lie. They are a silent, screaming testament to a profound technological incongruity. The real question is not how these machines worked, but what they were originally plugged into, and what happened to the civilization that built the grid. And so, the official history presents us with a hero, a savior. They give us a name, a face, and a heartwarming tale to wrap around the cold steel anomaly of the incubator. It is a distribution system. Here is the terrible truth. The fairs were the point of public display. The orphanages were the processing and distribution centers. The trains were the delivery mechanism. But where was the factory? Where was the point of origin? The incubator exhibits were the bridge. They were the missing component. the crucial link between production and distribution, cleverly hidden in plain sight as a humanitarian spectacle. They were not receiving premature babies from local hospitals in statistically impossible numbers. They were the final maturation stage of a biological assembly line, the finishing centers for the human product. The infants were displayed at the fairs, the showrooms, to create a cover story for their origin. "Look," the narrative whispered, "these are not manufactured. They are miraculously saved." Once acclimated and ready, these children were quietly funneled from the fairgrounds into the burgeoning network of orphanages, becoming part of the official tide of foundlings and waifs. From there, they boarded the trains, a seamless, efficient, and utterly diabolical pipeline. This was the machine that repopulated the silent world after the Great Cataclysm, after the Mud Flood, a machine that produced a generation with no past, a blank slate upon which a new, fraudulent history could be written. The signature of this plan is not just in America, or in Germany, or in France. His name, they tell us, was Dr. Martin County, a pioneer of neonatal care, a maverick who single-handedly fought against medical dogma and human indifference to save the lives of the smallest, most fragile citizens of a new world. It is a beautiful story. It has all the elements of a classic myth: the lone genius, the skeptical establishment, the triumph of compassion and innovation. It is the kind of story we are taught to admire in schoolbooks. It is also, upon the slightest forensic inspection, a logistical and chronological impossibility. A fairy tale engineered for the intellectual nursery. Let us, for a moment, attempt to believe it. Let us try to fit this narrative into the world they have described for us. Here is a man, a showman, with no verifiable medical degrees, no formal training in engineering or pediatrics, who somehow acquires and operates dozens, if not hundreds, of the most advanced medical devices on the planet. And where does he perform these miracles? Not in the hallowed, sterile halls of the world's leading hospitals. No, they famously rejected him. He performs them in the dust and grime of carnival midways. He sets up his life support emporiums in amusement parks, nestled between the freak shows and the hot dog stands. We are asked to believe that the most delicate of human lives were sustained for months on end in an environment that would be considered a public health crisis today. It is the faint, resonant hum of a single, unified global culture, an empire of such technological and organizational sophistication that it could implement a program of this magnitude. A culture that was shattered, buried, and whose fragments were then weaponized against its own descendants. We live inside the echo of that system. The evidence of this unified world is still all around us, in the identical, magnificent, and out-of-place architecture found on every continent. This architectural DNA is not a coincidence. It is the fossil record of a civilization they tried to erase. Look at the old post offices, the courthouses, the asylums, the state capitals in your own town, your own country. Have you seen them? Have you felt that they don't belong to the timeline we've been sold? That they were built by giants and inherited by pygmies? Tell us where. Share the location. We are mapping the ghost of a world, and every data point is a crack in the foundation of the lie. The incubator was not just a machine to save a life. It was the very womb of our inherited amnesia. We are tenants in a palace we did not build. We walk halls of impossible grandeur, beneath domes that defy our own laws of engineering. And we tell ourselves comforting stories to explain it all away. This isn't just a historical curiosity. It is a profound cognitive dissonance. It is the signature of a cover story. Do you feel the resonance of that inconsistency? Or do you accept the textbook explanation that saving premature babies was simply a form of public entertainment, a spectacle worth 25 cents a ticket? The story crumbles further when we move from the stage to the back office. An operation of this scale, running for over 40 years across multiple cities and continents, is not a charity. It is an industrial enterprise. It requires a vast and silent infrastructure. Consider the mathematics, the cold, hard numbers that history books so conveniently omit. A single exhibit, say at Coney Island or a World's Fair, featured 20 to 30 incubators. These were not simple heated boxes. They required constant, precise temperature and humidity control, filtered air, and a sterile environment. This implies a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation. It requires legions of highly trained nurses, working in shifts, with specialized knowledge that simply did not exist in the public domain. Who trained them? Where was this hidden nursing academy? It requires a continuous, reliable supply chain of specialized nutritional formulas, clean linens, and medical supplies. Who financed this? The official narrative, with a straight face, tells us it was funded by the quarters dropped into a box by curious onlookers. We are the children who found the keys to a kingdom, but lost the instruction manual for the throne. This condition, this profound and tragic ignorance of our own inheritance, has a name in the smaller, more isolated corners of our world. It is the signature of a cargo cult, a term from anthropology used to describe isolated tribes who, upon encountering advanced technology from an outside culture, attempt to replicate it without understanding its underlying principles, turning airstrips into ritual grounds and radio antennas into objects of worship. They mimic the form but have no access to the function. They perform the ritual, but the magic has fled. But what happens when the cargo cult isn't a small tribe on a remote island, but the entirety of surviving humanity? What happens when the advanced culture that left behind its artifacts was not from across the sea, but from across a chasm in time, from a past that has been systematically erased? The answer is all around us. We see it in the cathedrals we are told were built with hammers and chisels, and the star forts we are told were designed for cannons. We live inside the cargo cult. And the incubator exhibits of the 19th century are perhaps the most intimate, most disturbing ritual of this new amnesiac religion. This is not an explanation. It is an insult to our intelligence. The logistical paradox is staggering. To believe the official story is to believe that a single man, a carnival promoter, successfully ran an operation with a logistical footprint and technological requirement that would challenge a modern multinational corporation, and he did it all on a shoestring budget of public donations. It is a financial and operational absurdity. And then we come to the most unsettling part of this flimsy script: the raw material, the product, the babies themselves. The narrative tells us they were sourced from local hospitals, given up by desperate parents who could not afford care. But again, the scale defies the explanation. To keep 30 incubators running in a single location, you need a constant, predictable, and massive influx of premature infants. Was there a citywide epidemic of premature births every time Dr. County's show came to town? Did these tragedies conveniently align with the schedules of the world's fairs? The silence from the historical record is deafening. There are no detailed ledgers of where these thousands upon thousands of children came from. No chain of custody. They simply appear, ready for the final stage of maturation in these publicly displayed machines. This is where we must stop seeing County as a historical figure and start seeing him for what he was: a narrative construct. The inheritors, the survivors of the Great Silence, who stumbled out into a strangely empty world, found the remnants of a vast and incomprehensible biological infrastructure. They found these modules, these glass and steel wombs, silent and cold within the grand, surviving edifices. They did not possess the knowledge of the builders. They could not comprehend the original science, a science that likely did not rely on crude boilers and hot water pipes, but on something more fundamental. A science of resonance, perhaps, using specific sonic frequencies to accelerate cellular growth. A science of atmospheric energy, drawing power from the ether itself to create the perfect environment for maturation. A science we can now only dream of. Faced with this profound technological anomaly, the new operators did what any cargo cult would do. They simplified. They reverse-engineered the most basic, most obvious function they could grasp. They saw a box, they figured out how to make it warm. They saw that a small, fragile life form could be sustained inside. And in that moment of primitive understanding, a piece of high technology designed for mass-scale population generation, a true citizen factory, was demoted. It was downgraded into a simple infant warmer. It is the cosmic equivalent of finding a supercomputer and, marveling at the heat it produces, deciding its sole purpose is to be a space heater. A piece of brilliant psychological engineering. He is the perfect founder myth. The friendly, eccentric doctor who provides a simple, heroic answer to a question no one was supposed to ask. He is the face they put on an impersonal, industrial process. He absorbs all inquiry. Who built the machines? Dr. County. Who funded the operation? Dr. County. Where did the babies come from? Dr. County saved them. He is a historical ghost, a phantom conjured to stand in front of a vast, silent machine. We can find no patents in his name for these miraculous devices. We can find no corporate records, no board of directors, no factory blueprints for Connie & Co. incubators. There is nothing behind the curtain, because he is the curtain. He is the central pillar in the architecture of a lie, designed to personify an anonymous, planetary-scale repopulation program. They gave us a man, a hero, a myth, to prevent us from seeing the system, a system that wasn't saving a few fragile babies, but was finishing and distributing a generation. A system whose true origins and purpose have been buried under the foundations of the very world we inhabit. And the question we must now ask ourselves is not whether the story is true, but why such an elaborate fairy tale was necessary in the first place. They saw the shell, they missed the soul, they salvaged the function, but sacrificed the meaning. This act of technological desecration was not enough, however. The existence of these machines and the steady stream of children they produced required a new story, a cover narrative. The original purpose was industrial, efficient, and likely hidden from public view, as any factory process would be. It was mundane to the creators, but to the inheritors it was a terrifying miracle that had to be controlled. And the most effective form of control is to transform a mystery into a spectacle. The ritualization began by placing these machines in fairgrounds, by putting the infants on public display behind glass. They performed a powerful act of psychological engineering. They took a process that should have raised terrifying questions. Where did all these children come from? Who built these machines? Why are they here? And transformed it into a heartwarming tale of human ingenuity and compassion. It became a story about saving the fragile, the premature, the unlucky. It became a triumph of modern medicine, a fiction that conveniently began at the exact moment this inherited technology was being crudely reactivated. The spectacle was not for entertainment. It was for normalization. Each visitor, each family that walked through the pavilion became a participant in the mass delusion. What was it designed to hide? We have given the official narrative its moment on the stage. We have listened to the comforting, heroic tale of the lone showman, the savior of the premature, the man they call Dr. County. It is a story designed for applause, a story designed to soothe. But now the performance is over, the curtain has fallen, and in the silence that follows, we must turn from the stage to the back office. We must put away the storybook and open the cold, unforgiving ledger of logistics. Because history is not just a collection of stories, it is a chain of cause and effect, of resources and expenditure, of physics and mathematics. And it is here, in the brutal clarity of numbers, that the entire narrative edifice collapses into dust. This is the forensic audit. And the numbers do not whisper of a lie. They scream. Let us begin with a single unit. 1 incubator. The official history tells us these were simple, heated boxes, a rudimentary technology. But the photographs tell a different story. We see precision-engineered steel and glass, regulators, ventilation systems, complex mechanisms for maintaining a constant, life-sustaining temperature and humidity. To maintain a sterile, neonatal environment with a precision of 1 or 2 degrees, using 19th century technology is not a trivial matter. And the final brilliant stroke of this ritual was the price of admission. The 25-cent ticket was not a fee for a service. It was not to fund the operation. The logistics of that are a mathematical impossibility. The ticket was an indulgence. It was the price of belief. By paying the fee, the spectator purchased a share in the new narrative. They were no longer a passive observer of an anomaly. They were a patron of a miracle. They became complicit in the forgetting. Their small contribution bought their silence, easing the cognitive dissonance of seeing advanced life support systems operating next to a Ferris wheel, powered by what amounted to little more than a kettle. It was a ritual designed to make the unthinkable not only palatable, but heroic. A public ceremony for the baptism of a lie, repeated city after city, year after year, until the original function was completely overwritten in the collective memory. We are the descendants of this ritual. We were born from a technology we no longer understand, into a world whose history was rewritten to hide our very origin. If this vision of an amnesic humanity, of a species living in the shadow of its own forgotten greatness, resonates with you on a level you cannot quite explain, Check if you are subscribed. It requires a constant, regulated heat source, a boiler system demanding tons of coal or gas per week. It requires a filtration system to keep the soot and dust of a World's Fair or an amusement park from entering the chamber and killing the infant. It requires a steady supply of sterilized water, not just for humidity, but for cleaning. This is a single, self-contained, intensive care unit. Now place it not in a pristine hospital, but in a temporary wooden pavilion on the shores of Coney Island, amidst the sawdust, the salt air, and the unwashed masses. The cognitive dissonance is a physical force. It is the image of a clean room operating in the middle of a swamp. But there was never just one. A single exhibition, in a single city, housed between 20 and 30 of these advanced modules. Let us be conservative and say 24 units, operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The operational demands now multiply into a logistical nightmare. The fuel requirements alone would be staggering, requiring daily deliveries of tons of coal and the manpower to stoke the boilers day and night. The water, needing to be purified and sterilized in immense quantities, would necessitate an on-site industrial-grade boiling and filtration plant. We need awakened minds around here. We need to piece together the manual for this kingdom we have inherited, but a machine is only as honest as its operators. And our cargo cult handlers are not honest. They are inheritors, scavengers. They found this technology, and to explain its presence, they had to invent a past that never was. To do that, they first had to erase the past that was. This is the mechanism of the Great Silence. It did not begin with a whisper. It began with a scream, and then nothing. The event itself was not a slow decay. It was a sudden, violent erasure, a planetary reset. We see its scars in the geology and the layers of soil that have no business being there. The mud flood. Not a biblical allegory, but a physical, cataclysmic event of soil liquefaction on a global scale. A weapon, perhaps. An atmospheric event. The cause is secondary to the effect, the near total annihilation of the previous population. But the infrastructure, much of it remained. Buried, yes. Damaged, certainly. But intact. Grand, silent cities waiting for new inhabitants. Power stations waiting for a switch to be thrown. And biological complexes waiting for a command to repopulate. The survivors, the parasites who inherited this empty world, faced a logistical paradox of immense proportions. And then there is the human cost. The narrative speaks of dedicated nurses. Let us quantify that dedication. To properly monitor 24 critically ill infants around the clock requires a minimum of 1 nurse for every 2 or 3 incubators. That's a staff of at least 8 to 12 nurses on duty at any given moment. For a 24/7 operation, this means 3 full shifts. A permanent, on-site staff of no fewer than 30 and more likely 40 trained, specialized neonatal nurses. Where did this army of specialists come from in an era when nursing was still a nascent profession? How were they trained on this brand new technology? Where were they housed? What were they paid? We're describing the operational complexity of a modern hospital wing, supposedly funded by the sale of 25-cent admission tickets. The mathematics are not merely inconvenient. They are hostile. They are a declaration of war against the official story. Let us run the numbers on revenue. At 25 cents a ticket, to pay the salary of just 1 nurse, let's say a modest $2 a day, would require 80 paying customers. For a staff of 30 nurses, that's 400 visitors every single day, just to break even on the nursing payroll. They had a planet to fill, but a history to hide. Their solution was brutal in its simplicity. They initiated the Great Forgetting, a 2-front war against memory itself. First came the physical purge, the archive burning, a systematic, global campaign to destroy the records of the old world. Books, maps, schematics, family histories, scientific treatises, all turned to ash. They burned our memory from the pages of history, leaving only a carefully curated, fabricated account of slow, primitive progress. They gave us the myth of the pioneer in his log cabin, while they themselves were moving into cyclopean palaces of granite and marble. The second front was the engineering of forgetting. This was the psychological operation. They created a new timeline, a cover narrative, to explain away the ruins. The Industrial Revolution wasn't an explosion of innovation. It was the slow, clumsy rediscovery of inherited technology. The grand World's Fairs were not celebrations of new inventions, but showrooms to acclimatize the new, blank slate population to the wonders of the old world, presented as their own. And to explain the destruction, to account for the endless ruins in the shattered landscapes, they invented wars. The American Civil War, and others like it, became grand, sweeping epics of brother against brother. Conveniently, these fabricated conflicts provided the perfect explanation for the one thing their new world had in abundance: orphans. This does not account for the cost of the tons of coal, the water, the construction of the pavilion, the laundry service for thousands of pieces of sterile linen, the specialized nutritional formulas for the infants, the staggering cost of transporting these heavy steel and glass units from city to city, or the salary of the great Dr. County himself. The financial model is not just unsustainable, it is an absurdity. It is a mathematical black hole. We are asked to believe that a multi-million-dollar nationwide high-tech medical operation ran for over 40 years as a self-funded carnival sideshow. It is an insult to our intelligence. It is a cover narrative of the most cynical kind. And if the operational logistics are an impossibility, the supply chain is a ghost. It is a complete and total vacuum. Let us ask the forbidden question. Where was the factory? Where was the County & Co.? Incubator works that manufactured these dozens, perhaps hundreds, of identical, precision-milled medical devices. An industrial enterprise of that scale would leave a vast paper trail. Patents, corporate filings, blueprints, shipping manifests, invoices for tons of steel and mountains of custom-blown glass. There is nothing, no record, no factory, no patents in County's name. It is as if these machines simply materialized out of thin air at each World's Fair, fully formed. Millions of them. Children with no parents, no lineage, no memory of the world before. These were not the casualties of war. They were the product of the incubators. The first generation of the reset. A population born into amnesia, ready to be programmed with a false past. They filled the empty cities, raised on a diet of lies, taught to believe they built a world they had merely inherited. We are their descendants. We live inside the crime scene, and have been taught to call it home. The silence is their greatest weapon. Sharing this information is our defense. Send this to someone who needs to awaken. And so, we arrive at the final, quiet truth. The incubator was never merely a machine of steel and glass. It is a symbol, a dark mirror reflecting our true genesis. The tragic figures of the orphan trains are not a footnote in a forgotten history book. They are an archetype, our archetype. We are the children of the incubator, born into a world whose grandeur we cannot explain, whose history feels like a borrowed coat, 2 sizes too large. We are a species suffering from a planetary-scale amnesia, a cosmic orphanhood. This is the ultimate resonance of the Great Reset. It did not just reset the timeline. It reset the very definition of what it means to be human. This is the classic signature of inherited technology. We are not seeing an invention. We are seeing the reactivation of existing, stockpiled assets from a prior civilization. The operators of this program did not need to build the incubators. They just needed to find them and figure out how to crudely power them up with primitive boilers. This leads us to the final, most chilling logistical question. The supply chain of the machines is a phantom. But what about the supply chain of the infants? The official story speaks of desperate parents bringing their premature babies to the fairground savior. It's a touching, human story. But it is a statistical impossibility. For this operation to function, County required a constant, predictable, and large-scale supply of premature babies in every city he visited for 4 decades. The random tragedy of premature birth does not operate on a predictable, industrial schedule. How could he guarantee that 20 to 30 premature infants would be available, on demand, the moment his exhibition opened in Buffalo or St. Louis or Atlanta? He couldn't, unless the babies were not coming from the local population, unless they were being shipped in. The narrative is inverted. The exhibitions were not a destination for local, desperate parents. They were a centralized receiving and processing hub. We walk through the colossal ruins of our own forgotten home, telling ourselves nursery rhymes about men with horse-drawn carts and primitive tools. We stare up at copper domes crowning asylums that dwarf our modern achievements and feel a deep, unsettling cognitive dissonance, a silent hum beneath the surface of the official narrative. We live inside a crime scene we have been conditioned to call civilization. The men and women of the 19th century, with their haunted eyes staring out from faded photographs, were not our proud, industrious ancestors. They were the first generation of survivors, the first orphans placed into a world they did not build, tasked with forgetting a past they were never told. And we are their children. To accept their story of the incubator, the comforting tale of miraculous salvation, is to accept the tranquilizer of the great forgetting. It is to consent to our own erasure. The crime committed against us was not merely the burying of cities in mud, it was the burying of our identity in lies. They didn't just steal our world, they stole our memory of it, leaving us as the unknowing custodians of a legacy we can feel in our bones, but cannot name. But a memory, once stirred, cannot be put back to sleep. The incubators were not saving random premature infants, they were the final stage of a production line. They were the finishing and acclimation modules for human beings sourced from somewhere else. This is the logistical link, the missing piece that connects the impossible incubator exhibits to another great anomaly of the era, the orphan trains. The thousands upon thousands of children with no names, no parents, and no history, who were shipped across the country to populate the empty towns and cities of a post-reset America. The incubators were not the hospital, they were the hatchery. The numbers do not lie. They are a cold, hard wall against which the fairy tale of Martin County shatters into 1,000 pieces. The physics of fuel consumption, the economics of revenue, the industrial logic of manufacturing, and the statistical probability of the infant supply. Every single pillar of the official narrative collapses under the slightest pressure of a forensic audit. We are left staring at a ghost operation of impossible scale and efficiency, a vast, silent, and impossibly well-funded machine with no discernible origin and an unbelievable purpose. If you can assemble these fragments into a picture that makes logistical sense, if you can provide a plausible accounting for this economic black hole and its non-existent supply chain using the official story, we invite you to present your ledger. The evidence is not just in the bricked-up windows or the impossible architecture. The evidence is within us. It is the persistent feeling that we are strangers in our own land, inheritors of a kingdom whose name has been struck from the records. The task of this generation, therefore, is a sacred one. It is not to invent a new future, but to excavate our true past. It is to reclaim a dignity that was stolen from us before we were even born. This investigation is not about old buildings or forgotten empires. It is about remembering who we were before they told us who we must be. The investigation does not end here. It is only the beginning. If the resonance of this truth echoes within you, if you feel the call to continue digging, to unearth what has been deliberately buried, then join us. The work is difficult, and the path is shrouded, but you are not alone. Subscribe and activate the signal. Welcome to the resistance.